Hello, good morning, all of you. I am Shashank Gupta from Government J. Yoganandam Chhattisgarh College. Today we are dealing with themes in Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. In last chapter, in our last video, we have dealt with a summary of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. We have many themes in this chapter, and some of them are creating a legacy of women writers, women and society, financial status and intellectual freedom, subjectivity of truth. We will deal all of them one by one. Creating a legacy of women writers. A Room of One's Own was recorded in history of literature as a series of lectures that Woolf delivered to groups of students at Cambridge Women's College. She addresses these women explicitly and draws on certain assumptions and common knowledge that they are all learned, for example, and that they are women. So we immediately have to consider the particularity of the occasion when reading the text. As a successful woman, Woolf stands before these women scholars as their elder and somewhat superior, but also as their compatriot. They are allies in the same cause to become educated women and contribute to their society and the canon of scholarship and literature that inspires them. Woolf is aware throughout that she and these lectures are part of legacy and history of women writers. From that starting point of her as participating in a kind of legacy and offering something to the minds of the future, Woolf as the narrator invokes the women writers of the past and present to help her make her argument. From real authors like George Eliot and Lady Winchilsea to the invented Mary and Judith Shakespeare characters, Woolf presents a network of women who have missed out on their potential because of their status as women and the conditions of poverty and lack of education that status implies. By creating an imaginary sister for Shakespeare, Woolf emphasizes the anonymity and invisibility of women. She makes us imagine many more forgotten women that history has left behind and whose mind will never be expressed. Woolf describes male geniuses like Shakespeare as incandescent figures, known entirely by virtue of their uh, work and not by their own lives. Woolf shows that it is very difficult for women to be this way because their lives necessarily imposes on them to such a degree with childbearing, with homemaking, and with suffering. Therefore, both women's fiction and the women themselves are defined by their deprivation rather than being incandescent like the major male writers. Woolf claims that, as well as all the social conditions that have inhibited women, it is also this lack of history and legacy that continues to inhibit them. This is why she appeals to the young women before her to use their education to be a different kind of generation and to create a history for their daughters like young men have always had to admire and emulate. The next theme is women and society. In addition to establishing the necessity for women to have financial and intellectual independence, if they are to be able to truly contribute to the literary canon, Woolf addresses the societal factors that deny women those opportunities. As such, A Room of One's Own is a feminist text, but it does not allocate blame for the state of society to particular men or as a conscious effort by man as a whole to suppress women. Rather, she describes a society formed by the instincts of different sexes. For example, women to have children, marry early, be tasked with mending and caring for the family, and not being educated. That together define society and together uh, influence individuals' behavior and opportunities. This is not to say that Woolf sees society as being anything other than dramatically tilted in favor of man. She explores just how it is tilted in two ways. First, she shows how she herself has been shut out of the fictional college Oxbridge. Okay, Oxbridge, an amalgamation of the two elite English universities, Oxford and Cambridge. For Woolf herself, this Oxbridge idea was significant in her life. Her brothers and male contemporaries all seemed to go off to Oxbridge while she tried to challenge herself and educate herself with what little external resources she had. Second, she creates an imaginary woman named Judith Shakespeare, sister of William Shakespeare and his equal in talent. She then shows how, while William rises to fame and becomes an incandescent poet, Judith is prevented by the structure of society from doing so and ends up committing suicide. A Room of One's Own also examines the more taboo realm of female homosexuality, speaking honestly about the possibility of a woman's affection for women. By putting these usually silenced topic before her audience, she creates an atmosphere where feelings and taboos are able to surface and be expressed, and moreover, are able to become commonplace and understood as a normal part of womanhood. It is also worth noting that while A Room of One's Own does not seek to blame men, when describing men, it betrays a definite physical distaste at times. In her description of the men at the British Library, for instance, they are a ruddy, almost disgusting presence, reminding her of all the flaws she sees in society as a whole. Finally, it should be kept in mind that A Room of One's Own was crafted out of a series of lectures that Woolf delivered to women at the first women's college at Cambridge. With herself and those before her, Woolf creates a sense of a new community of women emerging, the educated, even professorial woman to match the naturally professorial man. This is a message of hope, but also a warning and an incitement in order to change at all the fragile position of women in literature. This generation must forcibly change it. The next theme is financial status and intellectual freedom. The title of Woolf's essay is a key part of her thesis that a woman needs money and a room of her own if she is to be able to write. Woolf argues that a woman needs financial freedom so as to be able to control her own space and life, to be unhindered by interruptions and sacrifices in order to gain intellectual freedom and therefore be able to write. Further, she argues that such financial and intellectual freedom has historically been kept from women, with the result that nearly all women, even those with literary talents and ambition, are unable to achieve their goal or potential because of a lack of opportunity to engage in sustained work and thought. As the narrator, Woolf examines her own life and the financial inheritance she received from her aunt, which gave her 500 a year, 500 pounds a year in those times, a very respectable sum for a young woman to live on. So, unlike women of lower class or without such good fortune, she was able to look forward to life of financial security and could actually focus on writing. She then imagines the fate of women without such a secure personal income, imagines how impossible the task of writing would seem even if one had the ambition to do it. The rare example she is able to cite of middle class or lower class women who decide to write after Ben, for example, were not even seen as admirable women by society and were instead belittled and thought almost unnatural. Because of that, Ben was seen not as a model for younger women to follow, but rather a deterrent against a life of living by one's wits. It is abundantly clear throughout the lectures that Woolf is not just making this argument to express her own views or to tell a story. She sees herself as having a job to do. And it is no coincidence that she is speaking in front of a group of scholarly young women with their professional lives ahead of them. Woolf makes sure that she directs her arguments to these young women in the hope that they will decide to change the fate of the next generation of women by providing them with a literary legacy and good fortune. For the narrator of a room of one's own, uh, money is the primary element that prevents women from having a room of their own, and thus having money is the utmost importance because women do not have power. They their creativity has not been systematically stifled throughout the ages. The narrator writes, intellectually, freedom depends upon material things. Poetry depends upon intellectual freedom, and women have always been poor, not for 200 years merely, but from the beginning of time. He uses this quotation to explain why so few women have written successful poetry. She believes that the writing of novels lend itself more easily to frequent starts and stops. So women are more likely to write novels than poetry. Women must contend with frequent interruptions because they are so often deprived of a room of their own in which to write. Without money, the narrator implies women will remain in second place to their creative male counterpart. The financial discrepancy between men and women at the time of Wilkes' writings perpetuated the myth that women were less successful writers. The last theme, but not the least, is the subjectivity of truth. In a room of one's own, the narrator argues that even history is subjective. What she seeks is nothing less than the essential oil of truth. But this eludes her, and she eventually concludes that no such thing exists. The narrator later writes, when a subject is highly controversial, one cannot hope to tell the truth. One can only show how one came to hold whatever opinion one does hold. To demonstrate the idea that opinion is the only thing that a person can actually prove, she fictionalizes her lecture, claiming fiction is likely to contain more truth than fact. Reality is not objective, rather, it is contingent upon the circumstances of one's world. This argument complicates her narrative. Woolf forces her reader to question the veracity of everything she has presented as truth so far. And yet, she also tells them that the fictional part of any story contains more essential truth than the factual parts. With this observation, she recasts the accepted truths and opinions of countless literary works. Thank you very much for listening to me, listening this lecture. We will come up with next video on another aspect of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. Thank you once again. Stay home, stay safe.